Good morning. This is going to be an informational video on sponsorship. We'll be talking about the research involved, the history, the current state, and how the future is going to look like. Um, this video is going to be divided into three parts, of which I'm doing the state of sponsorship research. Yara, my colleague, is going to take into account the evolution section, and we're going to conclude with Pat talking about how the future of sponsorship is going to look like. And before we move further, we would like to thank the author of the research paper, John Walliser, for this wonderful work of literature, and Mary for giving us this opportunity to see ourselves in videos. This feels great. Thank you. So the three main objectives of this research paper, as I mentioned in my earlier video, are the state of sponsorship research, the evolution, and the future of how sponsorship is going to look like. Now, when I talk about the objectives, two important names that come up who did an extensive research starting the early 1990s. These two researchers are Cornwell and Magnan, and they've done extensive studies. Um, and Out of all the studies that have been done, almost 233 studies altogether, these two researchers have been able to summarize and analyze and comment on eight of those. So these two researchers, Cornwell and Magnan, um, out of their research, the most important points they came up with were the nature of sponsorship, where they talked about how the definition of sponsorship has been so vague all over the world. The European definitions, the definitions on the Asian part, or the American definition. There was so much um, vagueness in those. So they also talked about how sponsorship was deemed to be close to advertisement or philanthropy. So they tried to differentiate between those as well. So the second important topic Cornwell and Magnan talked about was the managerial aspects of sponsorship research, where they basically talked about um, how setting objectives, organizing, planning, and executing are very essential elements of sponsorship. Third part, they talked about how effective a sponsorship research would be in terms of whether or not it is bringing out the awareness it is supposed to, and is it affecting the intentions of the buyers, or is it bringing out a repeat customer? So that was an important aspect of their research.
In the early days, sponsorship was not much different than philanthropy. Companies had an individual interest of corporate managers rather than a sensible evaluation of the benefits of sponsorship. In the last 30 to 40 years, sponsorship evolved from a small activity to a large industry. In the late 20th century, sponsorship was an alternative to advertising. In the 1970s, it was okay to associate with a sports team or event by buying a sponsorship package to simply grab eyeballs and expose your brand. If a team did well, the brand was associated with success. If a team didn't do well, the brand had the consumer's emotions at the time. If a brand was savvy enough, the brand would draft a story to grab the journalist's attention. In the same time period, it was okay to simply hang a logo at an event or be seen with an influential person, but not today. Somewhere in the last 5 to 10 years, companies began to realize that to be a credible brand, you had to be part of the fans' viewing experience. Buying a hefty sports sponsorship package does not have the same impact as it once did because consumers are looking for a meaningful conversation about brand and meaningful experience with the brand. Today, to have a shot at being successful, a brand must generate conversation about the brand instead of simply hoping people will talk about it. A brand should evaluate the experience of the customer, Build a story around the customer using social media and on-demand content, enhancing fan experience and participatory connection to the sponsorship. And lastly, make the consumer feel a connection. P&G's activation campaign for the Olympic Games played on the heartstrings of its consumers by running an ad centered on mothers of athletes and associating it with the Olympic Games home in a meaningful way for the core demographic consumers, the world's moms, by digging into a chapter of the Olympic story where their products are relevant. This sponsorship technique not only played on the emotions of its consumers and made them feel a connection, but also told a story. Social media and on-demand content also allows consumers to build a story around themselves to enhance the fan experience. Ultimately, the best way a brand can build a connection with fans is telling a story and experience with the consumer.
The growth of sports sponsorship over the past few decades has been enormous. We have seen it go from just being a partnership with a team or venue to a relationship between a brand, a team, and the consumer. It was once seen as just another form of advertising. Now it is about building an experience with the fans that they will remember and relate back to the sponsor. Today, it is all about creating a connection with the fans. With the technology always getting bigger, faster, and stronger, sponsorship is always having to adapt. We have seen sports sponsorship change over time with the advancement of cell phones and other mediums that are used to convey the sponsor's message. More and more people are doing everything from their phones or computers and do not watch traditional cable or satellite TV. This has led to new methods and ways to activate your sponsorship with the consumers. Today, we can see this when looking at Twitter, Hulu, and Amazon. All these have started streaming live NFL games and other major sporting events. This has been an alternative to the people that are no longer watching cable TV, and the sponsors have adapted to create this to make a way to get their message across as many platforms as possible. And we will continue to see them adapting and creating new ways to spread their message across as we go further and further into the future and technology advances more as well as society.
Can build a connection with fans is telling a story and experience with the consumer.
The growth of sports sponsorship. The growth of sports.
Good morning. This is going to be an informational video on oh, God damn.
The growth of sports sponsorship. The growth of sports sponsorship.